The warehouse in downtown Los Angeles reeked of sweat and arrogance. Marcus, the Crusher, Rodriguez stood in the center of the makeshift ring, his championship belt gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Blood dripped from his split knuckles onto the concrete floor, remnants of his latest victim, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt who now lay unconscious against the chain-link fence. "Is that all you've got for me?" Marcus shouted to the crowd of underground fight enthusiasts surrounding him. His voice echoed through the cavernous space, bouncing off rusted shipping containers and abandoned machinery. 3 years undefeated and you bring me this garbage? The spectators, a mix of wealthy thrill-seekers, gang members and martial arts fanatics, murmured their approval. Money changed hands as bets were settled. Marcus had just earned them another fortune, and his reputation as the most ruthless underground fighter on the West Coast grew stronger with each brutal victory. But tonight felt different. Tonight Marcus had bigger plans. He grabbed the microphone from Tommy, the fence Castellano, the fight promoter whose gold teeth glinted as he smiled nervously. The crowd fell silent, sensing something momentous about to unfold. "Listen up, you bloodthirsty degenerates," Marcus began, his dark eyes scanning the faces around him. "I'm tired of beating up wannabes and has-beens. I want a real challenge. I want someone who thinks he's a legend." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the tension build. The warehouse was so quiet that the distant hum of Los Angeles traffic seemed deafening. "Jean-Claude Van Damme," Marcus said, his voice dripping with contempt. "The so-called muscles from Brussels. The action hero who thinks his Hollywood kicks can compete with real martial arts. I'm calling him out. Right here, right now. $1 million says he doesn't have the guts to face me." The crowd erupted. Phones appeared instantly, recording every word. Within minutes, the challenge would be viral across social media platforms, shared by fight fans, movie buffs, and Van Damme supporters worldwide. Tommy grabbed the microphone back, his face pale. "Marcus, you can't be serious. Van Damme's a movie star, not a street fighter. He's probably in his 60s by now." Marcus laughed, a cold sound that made several spectators step backward. "That's exactly my point, Tommy. This old man built his career on fake fights and special effects. I want to show the world what happens when Hollywood fantasy meets real martial arts brutality." The crowd's energy was electric. Someone shouted Van Damme's name. Others chanted Marcus's nickname. The warehouse had transformed from a simple fight venue into something resembling a Roman Colosseum, with bloodthirsty spectators demanding their next gladiatorial spectacle. Marcus had been planning this moment for months. Born in East LA to immigrant parents who worked 3 jobs just to pay rent, he had clawed his way out of poverty through pure fighting skill and ruthless determination. Traditional martial arts schools had rejected him for being too aggressive. Professional mixed martial arts organizations had banned him for excessive violence. So he had created his own kingdom in the underground, where rules didn't exist and only the strongest survived. But beating anonymous fighters in warehouse matches wasn't enough anymore. Marcus craved recognition, fame, and the kind of money that would set him up for life. Challenging Van Damme was his ticket to international attention and massive pay-per-view revenues. The Belgian actor had been Marcus's childhood hero. As a kid, he had watched Bloodsport and Kickboxer dozens of times, dreaming of becoming a martial arts legend himself. But heroes, Marcus had learned, were just illusions created by Hollywood cameras and clever editing. Real fighting was about breaking bones and crushing spirits, not about choreographed dance moves and dramatic poses. Now, at 28 years old and with an undefeated record of 47 consecutive victories, Marcus felt ready to destroy his former idol and claim his place as the world's most feared fighter. Tommy was already working his connections, making phone calls to sports journalists and entertainment reporters. The story was too big to ignore. An unknown underground fighter challenging a legendary action star, it had all the elements of a media sensation. "He'll never accept," someone in the crowd yelled. "Van Damme's too smart to risk his reputation against a young killer like you." Marcus smiled, revealing teeth that had been knocked out and replaced multiple times during his brutal career. "Then I'll keep calling him a coward until he has no choice. I'll make it impossible for him to say no." The warehouse buzzed with excitement as Marcus climbed out of the ring. His next fight was already being planned, but everyone knew it would just be a warm-up. The real battle, the one that would either make Marcus Rodriguez a household name or destroy his career entirely, was still ahead. None of them suspected that Van Damme was already on his way to Los Angeles, having heard about the challenge within hours of it being made. And none of them knew that the aging action star had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity to prove that his skills were far from Hollywood fiction. Jean-Claude Van Damme stood on the balcony of his Beverly Hills hotel suite, watching the sun set over the sprawling metropolis of Los Angeles. His phone hadn't stopped ringing for the past 6 hours. Reporters, agents, promoters, and worried friends all wanted to know the same thing. Would he accept Marcus Rodriguez's challenge? At 59 years old, Van Damme had nothing left to prove. His movie career had spanned decades, earning him millions of fans worldwide. His martial arts credentials were legitimate. He had trained in karate, kickboxing, and ballet since childhood, competing professionally before Hollywood discovered him. But time, injuries, and the comfortable life of a movie star had taken their toll. His manager, David Sterling, paced nervously across the suite's marble floor. "Jean-Claude, this is insane. You're not 25 anymore. This kid has killed people in the ring. Literally killed them." Van Damme turned from the window, his famous split-capable legs still remarkably flexible despite his age. His weathered face showed every year of hard training and harder living, but his eyes burned with the same intensity that had made him a star. "David, you do not understand," Van Damme said in his distinctive Belgian accent. "This is not about money or fame. This young man has disrespected everything I have built. He thinks my skills are fake, my training is worthless. He calls me old and weak." Sterling threw his hands up in exasperation. "Because you are old. Compared to him, anyway. He's 28 and in his prime. You haven't had a real fight in decades." What Sterling didn't know was that Van Damme had been secretly training with some of the world's most dangerous fighters for the past 2 years. After a series of disappointing movies and personal struggles, he had returned to his martial arts roots, working with underground masters in Thailand, Brazil, and Russia. His body was harder than it had been in 20 years, his mind sharper, and his techniques more lethal than ever. The real reason Van Damme wanted to fight Marcus Rodriguez wasn't pride or publicity. It was revenge. 2 years earlier, Marcus had hospitalized Van Damme's nephew, Philippe, during an underground match in Miami. Philippe had been a promising young fighter, training to honor his uncle's legacy. Marcus had beaten him so brutally that Philippe spent 3 months in intensive care and would never walk properly again. Marcus probably didn't even remember the fight. For him, it had been just another victory, another young fighter's dreams crushed under his fists. But Van Damme remembered every detail from the grainy video footage he had watched 100 times. He remembered his sister's tears at Philippe's bedside. He remembered the doctors saying Philippe might never speak normally again. Now Marcus had given him the perfect opportunity for payback. "I am accepting his challenge," Van Damme announced, his voice cutting through Sterling's continued protests. "Call the promoters. Tell them I want the fight in New Orleans at the Superdome. Make it a pay-per-view event. I want the whole world to watch." Sterling's face went white. "New Orleans? Jean-Claude, that's going to cost millions to organize. The insurance alone." "I will pay for everything," Van Damme interrupted. "This is my fight, my choice, my risk. But I want it done properly. Not in some dirty warehouse, but on the biggest stage possible." Within hours, the news broke worldwide. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from excitement to horror. Fight fans couldn't believe their luck. A genuine legend facing a young, hungry challenger. Movie fans worried their hero was making a terrible mistake. Betting odds immediately favored Marcus by overwhelming margins. Marcus himself was training in his usual warehouse when Tommy Castellano brought him the news. The young fighter was pummeling a heavy bag when Tommy interrupted, holding up his phone to show Van Damme's official statement. "He said yes," Tommy announced, his voice mixing excitement with concern. "But he wants to do it at the Superdome. Full media coverage, pay-per-view, the whole circus. This is going to be huge, Marcus." Marcus stopped punching and read the statement. His expression shifted from surprise to savage satisfaction. "The old fool actually thinks he can beat me. This is going to be easier than I thought." But something in Van Damme's statement bothered him. The Belgian actor hadn't sounded desperate or defensive. His words carried a quiet confidence that didn't match Marcus's image of a washed-up movie star looking for one last payday. "When does he want to do this?" Marcus asked. 6 weeks, Tommy replied. "He says he needs time to prepare properly. The fight's scheduled for December 15th. They're calling it the final stand." Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. 6 weeks to remember how to throw a real punch instead of a movie punch. It won't be enough. As news of the confirmed fight spread, both fighters began the most intense training of their lives. Marcus pushed his already brutal regimen to inhuman levels, convinced that pure aggression and youth would triumph over age and experience. Van Damme disappeared from public view, training in secret locations with masters whose names were whispered in the darkest corners of the martial arts world. Neither fighter knew that the other had personal reasons for accepting this challenge. Neither suspected that their confrontation would become about much more than pride or money. And neither realized that their battle would ultimately reveal truths about themselves that they had spent years trying to hide. The countdown to December 15th had begun, and the entire world was watching. The abandoned sugar plantation outside New Orleans had become Jean-Claude Van Damme's private hell. For 4 weeks, he had trained 16 hours a day under the merciless guidance of Sensei Takeshi Yamamoto, a 70-year-old master whose reputation in underground fighting circles bordered on legendary. The humid Louisiana air clung to Van Damme's sweat-soaked body as he completed his 1,000th kick of the morning. Again, Yamamoto commanded in his sharp, accented English. "Your left side is weak. Rodriguez will target it immediately." Van Damme reset his stance, ignoring the burning pain in his aging muscles. His hands were wrapped in blood-stained cloth, knuckles split from hours of striking hardened makiwara boards. Every day brought new levels of agony, but also new discoveries about what his body could still achieve. Yamamoto was no ordinary trainer. He had been banned from professional martial arts for developing techniques considered too dangerous for competition. His methods included meditation under waterfalls, sparring with multiple opponents while blindfolded, and conditioning exercises that would cripple lesser men. Van Damme had sought him out specifically because conventional training wouldn't be enough to defeat Marcus Rodriguez. "Tell me about your nephew again," Yamamoto said as Van Damme completed another perfect combination. The old master knew that anger, properly channeled, could become a weapon more powerful than any technique. Van Damme's face darkened. "Philippe was everything good about our family. Kind, respectful, dedicated to his training. Rodriguez destroyed him for sport. Philippe will never compete again, may never even walk without pain. For Rodriguez it was Tuesday. For my family, it was the end of a dream." The intensity of Van Damme's next combination sent the heavy bag swinging wildly on its chains. Yamamoto nodded approvingly. Hatred was dangerous, but righteous anger could fuel superhuman performance. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in Los Angeles, Marcus Rodriguez was discovering that preparing for Van Damme required a different approach than his usual opponents. His trainer, Carlos Iron Fist Gutierrez, had studied every available video of Van Damme's movie fights, looking for patterns and weaknesses. "The old man's still flexible," Carlos observed as they watched footage of Van Damme performing his famous splits during a recent television appearance. "His kicks might surprise you. Don't underestimate his reach." Marcus spat into a bucket beside the ring. "Movies, Carlos. All movies. When I hit him for real, when he feels his ribs crack, he'll remember he's not invincible anymore." But Carlos was more worried than he let on. Something about Van Damme's recent appearances suggested the Belgian was in better shape than expected. His movements were sharp, his reflexes quick. This wouldn't be the easy payday Marcus anticipated. The media circus surrounding the fight had reached fever pitch. ESPN ran daily updates on both fighters' preparations. Social media was flooded with debates about experience versus youth, Hollywood versus reality. Celebrity endorsements poured in from both sides, with action stars supporting Van Damme and young fighters backing Marcus. The most disturbing development was the betting pool on whether Van Damme would survive the fight intact. Marcus's reputation for brutality had some bookmakers offering odds on permanent injury or worse. Van Damme's team tried to downplay these concerns, but privately they shared the same fears. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the chief medical officer assigned to the fight, had reviewed footage of Marcus's recent victories. What she saw kept her awake at night. "This isn't sport," she told the Athletic Commission. "It's attempted murder with an audience." But the fight had taken on a life of its own. Sponsors had committed tens of millions of dollars. The Superdome was sold out, with tickets reaching prices normally reserved for Super Bowl games. Pay-per-view pre-orders had already broken records. Van Damme's secret weapon was his training partner, a mysterious fighter known only as the Ghost, whose identity was kept hidden from media and even from Van Damme's own team. The Ghost was faster than Marcus, stronger than Marcus, and infinitely more ruthless than Marcus. Every sparring session left Van Damme battered and bruised, but also more prepared for what he would face in the Superdome. The Ghost was actually Dmitry Volkov, a former Russian Special Forces operator who had transitioned to underground fighting after being discharged for excessive violence. Yamamoto had called in every favor he had to bring Dmitry to Louisiana. The Russian's job was simple: beat Van Damme senseless every day until the Belgian could handle anything Marcus could dish out. Rodriguez fights like angry child, Dimitri observed after a particularly brutal sparring session. All power, no strategy. You survive his first attacks, he becomes desperate. Desperate fighter makes mistakes. Van Damme nodded, tasting blood from his split lip. Dimitri had open cuts above both eyes and bruised his ribs, but Van Damme had landed several combinations that would have knocked out most men half his age. The training was working. As December 15th approached, both fighters entered their final preparation phases. Marcus increased his aggression training, practicing techniques designed to end fights within the first 30 seconds. Van Damme focused on conditioning and strategy, preparing for a longer, more technical battle. Neither fighter slept well during the last week before the fight. Marcus was haunted by dreams of Van Damme moving faster than seemed possible for his age, landing strikes that felt impossibly powerful. Van Damme dreamed of Philippe in his hospital bed, and of Marcus standing over his unconscious body with that same cold smile. The final press conference was scheduled for December 13th, 2 days before the fight. Both fighters would face the media for the last time, make their final statements, and try to get inside each other's heads. But what neither Marcus nor Van Damme knew was that their battle had already attracted the attention of people who viewed it as much more than entertainment. International crime syndicates had placed enormous bets on the outcome. Government agencies were monitoring the event for potential violence. And several individuals with personal connections to both fighters were making their own plans for December 15th. The final stand was becoming much more dangerous than either fighter had anticipated. The press conference at the New Orleans Convention Center had the atmosphere of a public execution. 2,000 journalists, photographers, and fans packed into the main hall, with millions more watching the live stream worldwide. The tension was so thick it seemed to absorb sound, creating an eerie quiet despite the massive crowd. Jean-Claude Van Damme entered from the left, wearing a simple black suit that concealed the bruises and cuts from his brutal training regimen. At 59, he moved with the fluid grace of a man half his age, but his eyes carried a weight that hadn't been there in his Hollywood heyday. Behind him walked David Sterling and Dr. Mitchell, both looking like they were attending a funeral. Marcus Rodriguez emerged from the right side, and the crowd's energy shifted immediately. He wore a custom-made crimson jacket that matched the color of dried blood, his championship belt slung over one shoulder like a weapon. His entourage included Tommy Castellano, Carlos Gutierrez, and 3 bodyguards who looked capable of stopping bullets with their bare hands. The two fighters took their positions at opposite ends of a long table, separated by a forest of microphones and recording equipment. The moderator, veteran sports journalist Rebecca Chin, looked nervous as she called for order. "Gentlemen, in less than 48 hours, you'll face each other in what many are calling the most anticipated fight of the century. Jean-Claude, you've been training in secret for weeks. What can you tell us about your preparation?" Van Damme leaned forward, his accent somehow more pronounced than usual. "I have remembered what I truly am, Rebecca. Not a movie star, not an actor, but a fighter. This young man thinks Hollywood has made me soft. He will learn otherwise." Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Old man, I've watched your movies. Nice kicks, good flexibility, very entertaining. But I've also watched you get older, slower, weaker. Tomorrow night, I'm going to show the world that heroes are just fairy tales for children." The crowd stirred restlessly. Several shouted questions were ignored as the moderator tried to maintain control. "Marcus," Chin continued, "you've built your reputation on brutality. Some critics say you're less of a martial artist and more of a street thug. How do you respond?" Marcus's smile vanished. "Those critics haven't felt my fists break their bones. They haven't been unconscious on my floor, dreaming about their former lives. Van Damme is about to join them." Van Damme's expression remained calm, but those who knew him well noticed his hands tightening into fists. "You speak of breaking bones as if it is an achievement. I have broken many bones in my time, Marcus. Usually, they belong to men who underestimated me." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Marcus leaned forward, his dark eyes locked on Van Damme's face. "I know about your nephew," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying despite the whispered tone. "Philippe, wasn't it? Nice kid. Shame he wasn't tougher." The silence that followed was absolute. Van Damme's entire body went rigid, his face draining of color. For a moment, everyone in the room thought he might launch himself across the table. Instead, Van Damme spoke in a voice that was barely audible but somehow more terrifying than any shout. "Tomorrow night, you will understand why that was a mistake." Security moved in quickly, sensing that the press conference was about to become a brawl. Chin called for order, but the damage was done. The personal animosity between the two fighters had been laid bare for the world to see. As the fighters were escorted to separate areas, neither noticed the man in the expensive suit sitting in the back row. Viktor Petrov had flown in from Moscow specifically to attend this event, representing interests that had wagered over $50 million on the fight's outcome. His presence meant that this battle had attracted attention from the highest levels of international organized crime. Petrov wasn't alone. Representatives from cartels, Yakuza, and other criminal organizations had converged on New Orleans, all of them expecting specific results. Some had bet on Van Damme, believing experience would triumph over youth. Others had backed Marcus, convinced that brutality would overcome skill. What none of them knew was that both fighters had received anonymous threats over the past week. Van Damme had been told that his family would suffer if he won too convincingly. Marcus had been warned that his own safety depended on making the fight entertaining for the right people. That evening, Van Damme sat alone in his hotel room, staring at a photograph of Philippe taken before his fight with Marcus. His nephew's bright smile and confident posture seemed to mock the current situation. Philippe had believed in honor, respect, and fair competition. Marcus had destroyed those beliefs along with Philippe's body. Van Damme's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your nephew's accident was just the beginning. Tomorrow you can join him." Instead of fear, Van Damme felt only cold determination. Whoever was behind the threats had made the same mistake as Marcus. They had underestimated what he was willing to sacrifice for justice. Across town, Marcus was having his own problems. His latest sparring partner had lasted less than 30 seconds before being knocked unconscious. Carlos was worried that Marcus was peaking too early, burning through his aggression before the actual fight. "Save some for tomorrow," Carlos advised as medics attended to the unconscious fighter. "You've got nothing left to prove in training." But Marcus couldn't stop. The pressure from the media, the weight of expectations, and his own demons were driving him to increasingly violent extremes. He had built his entire identity around being unbeatable, unstoppable, and utterly without mercy. Any sign of weakness now would destroy everything he had worked to achieve. As midnight approached, both fighters lay awake in their hotel rooms, each convinced he was fighting for more than victory. Van Damme saw Philippe's broken body in every shadow. Marcus saw his own mortality creeping closer with each passing hour. Neither slept. Neither could afford to. The final stand was less than 18 hours away, and the entire world was holding its breath. But in the darkness of their separate hells, both fighters knew that only one of them would walk away from the Superdome intact. The storm was about to break and everyone caught in its path would be changed forever. The Superdome shook with the roar of 75,000 spectators as Jean-Claude Van Damme and Marcus Rodriguez made their way to the ring. The pay-per-view audience had already surpassed 20 million viewers worldwide, making it the most-watched combat sports event in history. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and dread. Van Damme entered first, wearing simple black shorts and his signature focused expression. The crowd's reception was mixed, cheers from longtime fans, boos from those betting against him. He moved through the tunnel like a man walking to his own execution, but his steps were steady and purposeful. Marcus followed 5 minutes later and the building erupted. His entrance was pure theater, pyrotechnics, pounding music, and a slow walk to the ring that radiated confidence and menace. He shadowboxed for the cameras, his movements sharp and dangerous. The crowd fed off his energy, chanting his name until the sound became overwhelming. Dr. Mitchell performed the final medical checks on both fighters. Van Damme's vital signs were steady, almost meditative. Marcus's heart rate was elevated, adrenaline already flooding his system. Both men were cleared to fight, though Mitchell privately wondered if she was signing Van Damme's death warrant. The referee, former heavyweight champion George "Iron" Washington, gathered both fighters in the center of the ring. At 6'4" and still intimidating at 60 years old, Washington was one of the few officials with enough presence to control what was about to unfold. "Gentlemen, you know the rules," Washington began, his voice cutting through the crowd noise. "This is a no-holds-barred contest. No eye gouging, no groin strikes, no biting. Fight ends by knockout, submission, or death. Any questions?" Neither fighter responded. They stared at each other across the small space between them, 40 years of combined fighting experience condensed into a moment of pure intensity. "Touch gloves and come out fighting," Washington ordered. Marcus extended his fist, but when Van Damme reached to touch it, Marcus pulled back and smiled coldly. "Too slow, old man." The insult was deliberate, designed to anger Van Damme and make him fight emotionally instead of strategically. But Van Damme's expression didn't change. He simply nodded and returned to his corner. The bell rang. Marcus exploded forward like a human missile, throwing a combination that would have decapitated most opponents. But Van Damme wasn't there. He had slipped to the side with fluid grace, making Marcus punch empty air. The crowd gasped. Van Damme's movement had been impossibly smooth for a man his age, like watching a ghost dodge a freight train. Marcus reset quickly, launching a vicious kick toward Van Damme's ribs. This time, Van Damme caught the leg and swept Marcus's standing foot, sending the younger fighter crashing to the canvas. The building went silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in disbelief. Marcus, undefeated Marcus, the killer from East LA, was on his back less than 30 seconds into the fight. Marcus rolled backward and sprang to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and rage. He had never been taken down so easily, never been made to look foolish in front of an audience. Lucky shot, Marcus snarled, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Van Damme said nothing. He circled Marcus with the patience of a predator, his hands low, his expression serene. This wasn't the desperate movie star Marcus had expected to face. This was something much more dangerous. Marcus attacked again, this time with calculated brutality instead of raw aggression. His punches were designed to break ribs, his kicks aimed at joints and pressure points. For 3 minutes he poured everything he had into destroying Van Damme. But Van Damme absorbed the punishment like a man who had trained specifically for this moment. He blocked what he could, deflected the rest, and began to counter with surgical precision. Every strike he landed was perfectly placed, finding nerves and vulnerable spots that Marcus didn't know existed. By the end of the first round, Marcus was breathing hard while Van Damme looked barely winded. The crowd was on its feet, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. What the hell is happening? Tommy Castellano demanded as Marcus returned to his corner. He's old. He's supposed to be finished. Marcus couldn't answer. His hands were shaking, not from fatigue but from the realization that he might have made a terrible mistake. In Van Damme's corner, Yamamoto whispered instructions in rapid Japanese. Van Damme nodded, his breathing controlled and even. The first phase of his plan was complete. Now came the real test. The second round began with Marcus fighting more cautiously, trying to find openings in Van Damme's defense. But the Belgian had spent 6 weeks preparing for exactly this scenario. Every technique Marcus attempted had been practiced against the Ghost 100 times. Van Damme began to press his attack, using combinations that Marcus had never seen before. His strikes flowed together like water, each one setting up the next in a deadly sequence that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Marcus found himself on the defensive for the first time in his professional career. Van Damme's kicks were lightning fast, his punches perfectly timed, and his movement was poetry in motion. The age difference that had seemed so important an hour earlier was now irrelevant. Halfway through the second round, Van Damme landed a combination that sent Marcus staggering backward. Blood poured from the younger fighter's nose, and his left eye was already swelling shut. The crowd was in a frenzy. This wasn't the massacre they had expected. It was an education in the difference between brutality and martial arts mastery. Marcus wiped blood from his face and smiled, the same cold smile that had terrified dozens of opponents. But now it looked forced, desperate. "My turn," Marcus whispered and launched himself forward with murderous intent. What followed was the most violent 30 seconds in combat sports history. Marcus abandoned all technique and strategy, throwing everything into a berserker assault designed to end the fight immediately. His fists were hammers, his kicks were sledgehammers, and his elbows were designed to shatter bone. Van Damme weathered the storm, taking tremendous punishment but giving ground strategically. He was bleeding from multiple cuts, his ribs were bruised, and his left shoulder had taken a devastating blow. But as Marcus's assault reached its crescendo, Van Damme saw his opening. Marcus overextended on a haymaker punch, putting all his weight behind a blow that would have knocked out a horse. Van Damme ducked under it and countered with a spinning kick that caught Marcus perfectly in the solar plexus. The impact lifted Marcus off his feet. He crashed to the canvas, gasping for air that wouldn't come, his face turning purple from lack of oxygen. The crowd was on its feet, screaming with excitement and disbelief. Marcus, the unbeatable champion who had never even been hurt, was writhing in agony, unable to breathe. Washington began his count. 1, 2, 3. Marcus struggled to his knees, his vision blurred and his lungs burning. Everything he had built his identity around was crumbling in front of 75,000 witnesses. 4, 5, 6. With superhuman effort, Marcus forced himself to his feet at the count of 8. But Van Damme could see that his opponent was finished. The younger fighter's legs were unsteady, his guard was down, and his eyes showed the glassy look of a man who had been fundamentally broken. Van Damme approached slowly, giving Marcus every opportunity to surrender with dignity. But Marcus, even facing certain defeat, couldn't let go of his arrogance. "Come on, old man," Marcus gasped. "Finish me if you can." Van Damme's expression softened with something that might have been pity. Then he moved. The final combination was a work of art. Van Damme's hands moved too fast to follow, landing strikes that shut down Marcus's nervous system piece by piece. The finishing blow, a perfect uppercut that caught Marcus as he fell forward, sent the undefeated champion crashing to the canvas with a sound like thunder. Marcus didn't get up. Washington's count seemed to echo forever. When he reached 10 and raised Van Damme's hand in victory, the Superdome exploded with noise that could be heard miles away. Van Damme stood over his fallen opponent, exhausted but victorious. As medical personnel rushed to attend to Marcus, Van Damme knelt beside the unconscious fighter and whispered something that no one else could hear. Later, when Marcus finally regained consciousness in the hospital, he would remember Van Damme's words. "This was for Philippe. But it was also for you. Sometimes we need to be broken before we can become who we're meant to be." The final stand was over. The legend had proven that some things, skill, honor, and righteous purpose, could never be defeated by mere brutality. And in a small room in Miami, Felipe Rodriguez watched the replay of his uncle's victory and smiled for the first time in 2 years. The old lion had roared one final time, and the whole world had heard it.